Books make you hope. Books make you dream. Books make you laugh. Books make you scream. This is the Books That Make You show, discussing books with authors and experts, unraveling the inner pages of all the books that help make us who we are. Hosted by Desiree Duffy.
Hello, welcome one and all. It is time for the Books That Make You show, and I'm your host, Desiree Duffy. And today we're talking about books that make you not cope, but actually heal, especially for the frontline healthcare providers. Now, there's a lot of self-help books out there, a lot of guides that help us deal with stress and PTSD, anxiety, trauma, the pandemic, everything that's going on, the stresses of our times. But this book that we're going to talk about today deals directly with the frontline people who are helping, doctors and nurses, technicians, the people that are doing everything it takes right now to help everybody else. And we're going to talk about what they're going through. Our guest today is not only an expert in his field and an author, but he co-wrote the book, Why Cope When You Can Heal? And his name is Dr. Mark Goulston. He's a former UCLA professor of psychiatry. He is also a hostage negotiation trainer, a speaker, executive coach, and the best-selling author of 8 different books. Now, his newest book, the one we're talking about today, he co-authored with former hospital CEO Diana Hendel. It's called Why Cope When You Can Heal? How Healthcare Heroes of COVID-19 Can Recover from PTSD. And it was just recently released just in time to help healthcare workers who are already at their wits' end, but they just keep going and going to protect the rest of us. Now, Mark also has his own highly rated podcast called My Wake Up Call, and he's also the host of the weekly LinkedIn live show called No Strings Attached. Hi, Mark. Welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me, Desiree, and more importantly, entrusting your audience to me, because I know it's so important to you that you give them value, that you help them, you give them insight and practical advice to make their lives better. So I know that matters to you. So I'm honored to be on the show with you.
I appreciate you being here, and I appreciate this book. So why don't you, in your own words, set the stage for us? Tell us about this book and why it's so important that it's coming out or just came out recently.
Well, every day we're rubbernecking the television. We probably shouldn't, because we're just staring at it like we're rubbernecking a bad traffic accident, and it's probably stressing us out. And what we're seeing is our healthcare workers, the frontline people, we're seeing how stressed they are, but they soldier on. They're duty bound. And what caused me to write the book is I was a suicide expert for 30 years, a UCLA professor, and fortunately none of my patients died by suicide. And I'm also passionate about helping veterans come back. And there's a statistic that 20 or 22 veterans die by suicide every day. And I thought, the pandemic is a war. And the soldiers and military know about wars like that. And whereas healthcare workers, they're very duty bound, but they're not necessarily warriors, but they're in a war. And so I'm determined to do everything I can to prevent them from going off the deep end. It's a real tragedy. And I can tell you as a medical doctor and psychiatrist, every time I hear a story, and there are stories in the book of someone who took their life. It just hits me right through the heart. So we wrote the book because what we anticipate, and it may be a little premature because we didn't expect it to be surging and surging and surging. And so the focus now is getting through the pandemic, getting to the vaccines, getting them distributed. But what's interesting, I think, the parallels book is that what we talk about is what do healthcare workers do in their mind to survive? Because every day they're seeing horrific and terrifying scenes, and they're only human, and they might otherwise panic. We talk about that. They feel fragile and they might panic, but they're so duty-bound, and they have their peers and they support each other, that what happens is they get an adrenaline rush from all the danger, and that insulates them from all the horror, terror, and fear that they have. But when the danger goes away, which is what happens to veterans, and the adrenaline insulation goes away, everything they push down because they didn't dare think about it, they're going to relive. They're going to get nightmares. And they're going to intrude in their life. And one of our beliefs is that that what causes or contributes to post-traumatic stress disorder is that people push down things that they don't know how they survived. When you talk to anyone who's really been traumatized by war, by COVID-19, by violence, by rape, and you say to them, you look them in the eye, and you say, good for you, you're so courageous, you got over it. I'm telling you, Desiree, they look you straight in the eye and they say, I didn't get over it. I got by it. I'm not the same. I'm not the same. And then you say, what do you mean? I'm not the same. I'm tentative. I don't sleep. I've got nightmares. I'm always on guard. And so what we have put out in the book is a way to help them feel the unfelt feelings and think the unthought thoughts, which is what they needed to do to survive. And we actually introduced to the world an approach called surgical empathy.
And what's that?
Okay, I'm glad you asked. Surgical empathy is a way of going into the depths of their pain and causing them to feel felt. And feeling felt is different than just feeling understood or figured out. And
what do you mean by feeling felt? Explain that a little bit.
Well, here's an example. This is an example of clinical empathy versus surgical empathy. So clinical empathy, you're there as a professional and you're checking boxes and you say, do you feel depressed? Do you feel anxious? Do you feel scared? And you're checking boxes and they're nodding from the neck up. So try that on for size compared to you saying to them, you feel depressed, don't you? You feel scared, don't you? You sometimes don't know how you're going to get through this. Isn't that true? So it's almost like AM versus FM radio. The first was AM, announcing facts, you check boxes. But the second one, the surgical empathy, when you say that you feel such and such, they lean into the understanding. And we actually, in the book, we've come up with something called the 12 words. And the 12 words are feelings that we help people feel, give a name to, as they're going through, after the danger is past, the horrific moments, the terrifying moments, the fragile moments, the times when they felt they were panicking. And so what we're doing is we're helping them go back to those places, and then we facilitate their feeling what they felt. And we came up with something called the 12 words. And the 12 words are anxious, afraid, overwhelmed, fragile, depressed, frustrated, angry, ashamed, alone, lonely, exhausted, numb. Mm-hmm. What happens is when you give a person a word that attaches to what they're feeling and they express it to you and feel it, it releases it. Which is, do you follow me? Which is different than putting a box clinically. And as they release it, they begin to cry with relief. We also have something in there called the distress relief exercise. So when we have people go back to those moments that they just survived and they pushed everything down, and we encourage people to create a journal where whenever they get triggered during the day, we have them write down the day and the time that it happened. Then write down what just happened. Write it down in a couple sentences. What did you think when it just happened? What did you feel when it happened? What does it make you want to do? That's the most important one, because you get people to express the impulse as opposed to acting on it. I feel like drinking. I feel like running away. I feel like kidding something. I feel like going to the closet. So when you get that's the most important one. That's the pivotal thing. And when they express it, they don't have to act on it. Then you tell them, take a deep breath. What would be a better thing to do right now? Why is that better? And as we've applied this to individuals, and we're doing pilot programs with healthcare workers, and we've done it with veterans, is when you ask them what would be a better thing to do, they say, talking it out the way we're talking it out. They say, I never talk it out. But can you follow that and track with that a little bit, Desiree?
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems to me, too, this book is written primarily for healthcare workers. And obviously, you've worked with soldiers, people in wartime. But it seems like this time in history is like no other. And people are adapting to different roles that they might not even know what they're doing. I can't help but think of the person who is unwittingly, unknowingly, suddenly a healthcare provider for family members. That, we're doing things, we're taking on roles that we never had before. Parents are now being teachers, and we're separated from our families, and there's just so much tension going on. So is this something that anybody can use, that is applicable for just about anybody during this time?
It is. I mean, this will work for everyone. It was a editorial decision by us and HarperCollins, because I know as a professional and someone who's worked with veterans, I can tell they're going through a war, and I know what they need to do to survive. And what's happening is when the war passes, they're gonna be vulnerable to what happens to our veterans. As I mentioned, I think before, why are veterans having problems? They're not in active duty. They're not getting shot at. Why is it that they come home and why can't they be happy with the rest of their life? It's because everything they pushed away and pushed down wants to come up again. It's like an abscess that you need to drain, and that's why we call it surgical empathy. Because what they're afraid of is you can't drain the abscess. What they're afraid of is it's going to explode. One of the analogies we use is imagine you're a healthcare worker or parent having to teach, or as you said, anyone who has had to just change their roles. And every time you get nervous, it's like a screaming cat inside your brain that you have to put in the cellar and lock up. And then you put another screaming cat there, and then 10 more, and 100 more. And you keep locking them up because you have to function. But then one day, when the danger goes away, you got to open the cellar.
You got a lot of screaming cats, don't you?
Yeah, and so surgical empathy, with some of the things we've outlined, is a way to take out one cat at a time.
In many ways, you and your co-author, and I want to ask you a little bit about her too, but you're being preemptive, you're being visionary, because right now we are still in the thick of this thing. We don't know exactly when it's going to end. We hear about these vaccines and we're very hopeful, but as time goes on, we realize that things are not going as swiftly as we want. Let's face it, we're a society of immediate gratification. Oh my God, you mean this thing took over a year at this point, or almost a year at this point? So talk a little bit about how your expertise and your work in the past has prompted you and your co-author too to write this book now, because you're looking at what people are going to be experiencing in the near future, right?
Right. Well, a little bit of I feel like I won the lottery with my co-author. Her name is Diana Handel. She was on my podcast, and I just fell in love with her. I said, this is Angela Merkel. And she was the CEO of a hospital, and she grew up in the hospital. She started out as a pharmacy student, And she reached the role of CEO, and on her 100th day in 2009, an employee of the month came in and killed his two supervisors and himself. And she led the hospital through that back to emotional and financial health. And this is where she won me over. She said, I got to 2015 and the hospital was in good shape. And I had this realization that the hospital was healthy and they deserved a healthy CEO, and I wasn't. It just touched me. It's touching me now. And I said, what do you mean? She said, I kept getting triggered. She said, I didn't know I had PTSD. I kept getting triggered. There'd be a bomb scare, there'd be something. It's not like I went to another location. Every day I went to the place and I walked by where the killings took place. And they took place in her department. It was someone who worked in her department that she grew up in. And so she said, I'm going to take care of myself. And then she realized I have PTSD. She got it treated. And she consults to organizations going through trauma. And what we also cover is all this traumatic stress doesn't just happen to individuals. It happens to organizations. When something awful happens in these organizations, the ripple effect in terms of blame, shame, guilt, anger, it's huge. Why didn't we do this? Who was supposed to do this? And then all the camaraderie can turn to finger pointing, which just adds to the stress.
Let's talk about, you've said guilt and shame a few times. I want to key into those words because those aren't ones that I would readily list off. And you've mentioned them a few times. What do you mean by that? Who's feeling guilty, shameful? What are some things that, healthcare workers or people in general are feeling right now that would cause that?
Well, I'm also involved with some initiatives to counter burnout. We read a lot about that teachers are getting burned out, and healthcare workers and doctors are getting burned out. And one of the causes of it is what they call moral injury. And the moral injury is, I have to decide this person lives, this person dies because we don't have enough respirators. Someone is telling me, please tell me it's going to be okay. And some of them I tell the truth, but some of them I lie because they're looking at me with wide-eyed terror. And so I'm making all these different decisions, and I'm doing the best I can, but it feels like a moral injury. It feels like, in order to help some people, I'm hurting other people. And there's one of the toughest things that I hear is the reports from healthcare workers of people dying alone and doing FaceTime between the dying person and their loved one on the outside. Or not being able to make the time for that, because you rushed off to something else and then it was too late. So you get haunted. Geez, I meant to get back to so-and-so so they could say goodbye to their loved one. So what happens in healthcare workers, especially doctors, they have trouble attending to their hurt because their focus is to attend to the hurt of others. So that can start to feel a sense of shame or guilt.
And I imagine it's important too for healthcare providers to take care of themselves first before they can take care of other people. Because if they continuously feel that way, then it's going to be harder for them to actually help other people. I mean, they have to take care of themselves first, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the things we point out is how do you maintain mental health in a war? Well, one thing is to maintain healthy routines. Exercise, right food, attend to your sleep, stay in contact with people, reach out to your peers, try to open up with people. We also give tips to, well, what if you're the loved one and my spouse comes home and they're staying in the garage? How do I help them? I know my loved one is stressed out. How do I help them? Well, one of the things you can do is do tasks. I mean, all day long they are doing tasks. And so any of the little things that you can take care of for that loved one who is a healthcare worker, some of those little things that can make a big difference. And also listen more. Don't jump in out of your own anxiety and say, "Oh, it's all going to be okay." Try to listen more. There's actually there's a 3-step thing that you can not only apply to a healthcare worker loved one, but this is something you can apply to your kids, because kids are having a rough time. There's an increase in depression, anxiety, and unfortunately suicide in kids who are staying home now. And so here's another example of surgical empathy. So, because I want to give listeners a taste of it. So when you're with that person, here are the 3 questions. At its worst, how awful are you capable of feeling? Not awful as a person, but how much pain are you capable of feeling? When you say that to someone, and they pause, and they'll look at you, and they'll probably say, pretty awful. And you say, pretty awful or very awful? Very awful. And then you say to them, when you're feeling that, how alone do you feel? Pretty alone. Pretty alone or all alone? All alone. So if you're getting a taste of this, Desiree, you can see it, you can draw it out. And then the third thing you say, take me to the last time you felt it. You're going to go, what? Take me to the last time you felt it when you were all alone. And here's something that psychotherapists know, and you'll probably know it intuitively. When you get someone to describe something so clearly, it was 2:30 in the morning, I couldn't get back to bed, I was pacing around the bedroom, I started looking for old expired Benadryl. At one point I felt like putting my fist to my head through the wall, and I just kept walking, and there's a point at which I just started hitting the pillow and whatever. When someone describes it so clearly that you as the listener can see it, they re-feel it.
Mm-hmm.
When they re-feel it, they're not alone. And what will happen is you let them cry. So don't get freaked out if they start to cry. You're draining the abscess of stuff they're holding in. It's building up and building up and building up, and one day feels like it's going to explode and take them down.
That makes perfect sense. And let me ask you this. I love that the book has that in there, like practical, actionable things that people are going to understand and be able to do. It's not just talking, it's showing as well. What are some things that people might need to be on the lookout for from their relative or loved one or somebody that they know who is a healthcare provider who might be at this stage, or feeling depressed, feeling PTSD? Are there any things, any traits and characteristics that people can be on the lookout for that can alert them that maybe, hey, this is a time to try to help them out, to see what's going on with them?
Well, you look for a change in behavior, but you also look for a change in your own feelings. If you're around them and you find yourself walking on eggshells because you don't want to upset them, and you don't want to make them feel worse, they're probably flirting with some of those stages. Often they will withdraw because what's happened is they've been overstimulated all day long coping with this. And so they will withdraw. But the problem is the more that people withdraw, and I understand it, the more they are vulnerable to their imagination, the more they're vulnerable to reliving the scenes that they saw during the day. So I can understand where they just want to collapse from it. And what you also may see is that they lean into some compulsive behaviors. Instead of having one drink, they're drinking a bottle of wine. They're eating more. They just look tired all the time. So some of the signs.
I just want to circle back. When you say people are vulnerable to their imaginations, are you meaning that when people get to that state, they start envisioning destructive behavior. Is that where you're going with that? Can you explain that a little bit more?
It's not necessarily destructive behavior. What happens is they see the scene that they were helpless in. An interesting thing that we've identified in working with doctors, especially doctors who are heading towards burnout, we've seen three things that seem to be violated. One of the things that attract doctors, especially doctors, and the nurses is a whole other category, but doctors, what attracts them to medicine is they're going to have autonomy, they're going to develop a mastery of something, and it feels like it has high purpose. And so what's happened is, for many of them, they often feel like their autonomy is taken away. As I said, they're directed to do this, do that. And then if something about that rubs them the wrong way, there's a moral injury. Other people are making decisions, and then sometimes you have to carry them out. And so when I say your imagination is, again, think of everything you have to do to make it through it. Recently, in another interview, I talked about the analogy of lifeguards. When they train you to be a lifeguard and you go out to a drowning person, you don't give the drowning person instructions. They teach you how to literally grab onto them, but in a way in which the drowning person doesn't pull you down. Mm. So they teach you how to do that. And so, but the pushing all of these thoughts away and the repressing of feelings so that you can focus are going to come back and hurt you later.
Yeah. I visualize and can see. I like that metaphor of the drowning person. That makes perfect sense. The book that we are talking about is Why Cope When You Can Heal, and it's How Healthcare Heroes of COVID-19 Can Recover from PTSD with Dr. Mark Goulston. We're going to need to wrap up pretty soon, but I want to touch on the fact that you also host a podcast and you're also doing a live LinkedIn show. Can you tell us just a little bit quick about each so that people can check you out some more and check out some of your shows?
So my Wake Up Call is a conversational podcast where I speak to thought leaders and influencers about what was your calling and purpose in life, and what matters most to you, and what were the wake-up calls that led you there. I recently had a wonderful person on, Sharon Kleifman, who's an expert in remote work. But I've had people like Larry King on. I had David Shulkin. He was the secretary of the VA that transitioned from Obama to Trump and then was let go by Trump. I've had Norman Lear on, a woman named Margaret Heffernan, who is one of the top TED speakers ever. And we talk about what matters most to them and their wake-up calls. And we often get into their childhood because they saw things in their childhood that either inspired them or gave them determination. And then the other show is a weekly LinkedIn Live show called No Strings Attached. And on it, my guests and I, and I'm excited because nearly 100% of the 150 guests I've had on my wake-up call, when I've said, hey, want to be on my show? They've all said yes. And on No Strings Attached, my guests and I give away ideas with zero strings attached. You want to monetize it? You don't want to attribute it to my guests or me? Fine. There's no strings attached. Because to sit on ideas because it's too complicated to get an NDA, or people are giving you all sorts of advice, or all sorts of legal matters, ideas that can change the world that never see the light of day, it's a waste. So I'm trying to do something to fix that.
Oh, that's such a great idea. I love that. It's excellent. Dr. Mark Goulston, tell people where people can find you then online, and as well, let everybody know really quick again where they can find the book.
The whycopewhenyoucanheal.com is the website. It's a beautiful website. And we're real pleased with it. And I have a website, markgoulston.com. Goulston.com. And I have 530,000 Twitter followers. I'm not sure how I got those, but that's at Mark Goulston. And I'm on Instagram as well.
Fantastic. Thank you for everything that you do, the wonderful books that you write, and everything that you're one of those people who give. And I love the fact that your latest endeavor, No Strings Attached, it exemplifies who you are, because it's just like, let's get it out there and work together, and nobody has to own it or lay claim to it. I love that about you. Thank you, Dr. Mark Goulston, for being here today.
My pleasure. You know, the best thing about giving things with no strings attached, nobody can steal it from you.
Right? That's it. That's it.
Give it away, you don't have to worry.
It's like, take it. And then the cool thing too is that if you see that idea or that thing blossom and become a thing, you know that in some small way you contributed to that. So I think that's a beautiful thing.
Hope so. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, for being here. And thank you, everybody, as well, for being here today on the Books That Make You show. Again, I'm your host, Desiree Duffy, and you can find out more about us on the website, booksthatmakeyou.com. As well, we're on Facebook and Instagram, and of course on YouTube. Make sure that you're subscribing so that you can check out all of the shows just like this one, plus other great content that we provide. Until next time, all of my bookish buddy, please enjoy all of the books that make you exactly who you are.
The executive producer for Books That Make You is Desiree Duffy. Produced and sound mastered by Phil Giangrande. Engineering by Dave Nabox. Social media and promotion by Bree Sweeter. For more, visit booksthatmakeyou.com.